Welcome to October Book Talk. This month's focus is on the supernatural and horror. With that, we'll be talking about Stephen King's 1977 novel, The Shining. This was his third novel. His previous two being set in Maine. Stephen King was looking for some new inspiration, so he decided to move his family to Boulder, Colorado for 1 year in hopes to find a new source of inspiration. While staying in Boulder and at the suggestion of some friends, the Kings decided to go to Estes Park, which was about an hour and a half and in the Rocky Mountains, to stay at the Stanley Hotel. The Stanley Hotel in the 70s used to close down at the end of each season because the roads would eventually become too impassable from storms. So while they were staying there, they were amongst the few remaining guests for the season. There was very limited staff, practically had the whole hotel to themselves. As the story goes, Stephen King visited the bar that night and was complimented a whole bottle of gin, which he decided to drink in one night. As he walked around the hotel, very disoriented and drunk, he became fascinated with the architecture and the style of the hotel, and slowly the whole story came into his mind. For those that have read it, it centers around the Torrance family, Jack, Wendy, and Danny Torrance. Jack is a recovering alcoholic, decides to take a job as a caretaker for a hotel in the Colorado mountains that closes every season for the winter. So as you can see, the similarities between Stephen King's visit and the plot of the story are very similar. While staying in the hotel, the Torrance family begins to encounter some supernatural events that leads to essentially the destruction of the family. While it was one of my favorite novels, it's very relatable on a human level. It deals with isolation, a family struggling with their relationship, and a lot of supernatural ghosts just for fun. And any of those familiar with the novel know that there has been a movie made, actually two. The first was Stanley Kubrick's 1980 version of the film. Ironically, the film is loved by horror fans, but hated by Stephen King. Most of this has to do with Stanley Kubrick's vision of the film being completely different than Stephen King's vision of the novel. While I like both Kubrick's version of the film and the novel, I can see Stephen King's dismay with the production. However, in the 1990s, Stephen King decided to work with ABC and create a miniseries based on more faithful adaptation of his story. It was a 3-part miniseries that lasted 1 week, and it was about 6 hours long. Now that version of the film was actually filmed at the Stanley in Colorado, whereas the version of Kubrick's was filmed mostly on sound stages in London, with some exterior shots being at the Timberline Resort in Oregon. So 6 years ago, in October, my wife and I, in celebration of our anniversary, flew out to Colorado to visit the Stanley Hotel, which is in Estes Park, Colorado. As you can see here, this is the front shot of the hotel. It's very grand, built in the early 20th century by Stanley Steamer. Very classic design in one of the most beautiful hotels and in one of the most beautiful places of the world. Here is infamous room 217. This is the room that Stephen King stayed in when his wife vacationed here in the 70s and reportedly had a paranormal encounter himself, which gave him the whole idea and inspiration for the novel The Shining. We did not stay in this room, but we walked past it. Supposedly it is home to a very mischievous spirit. Folks can obviously stay in that room if they choose to. This is the front lobby. I was sitting down here one morning by the fire drinking a cup of coffee, and I noticed in the far back of that picture is the entrance to the ballroom. I noticed the overhead lights kept flickering on and off, and I noticed it for a few minutes and realized it was a pattern, so I decided to ask the front desk clerk what was actually going on. He looked at me with a smirk and said, "Not really sure, it's been happening all morning." So, could have been paranormal, it could have been faulty wiring, still it was very neat. This was a love seat that was on the 4th floor. It was right outside of the door to our motel room. afternoon, my wife and I were going to get dinner, and we walked out. I walked out first, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw what appeared to be a blonde woman sitting on the chair. When I looked again, she had disappeared, so I shook it off, and 30 seconds later, my wife walks out the door. She says she sees the exact same thing. We both thought it was very interesting. Who knows what it actually was, but it was very neat. Now I'm going to briefly talk about Stephen King's 2013 novel, Dr. Sleep. Dr. Sleep's important for several reasons. One is that it's Stephen King's only true sequel, a sequel to The Shining. And the reason he decided to even write a sequel is because his characters from the first novel were so beloved and it was such a well-received book. While the story is a little different, it is classic King. Finally, I'd like to talk briefly about a new horror writer, Paul Tremblay. Paul Tremblay is quickly earning a reputation as one of the best in the genre, winning several Bram Stoker awards for his fiction. His 2020 novel, Survivor Song, takes place in Massachusetts and deals with a small town overcoming a rabies-like virus and all the hysteria that is produced from an unknown virus overtaking the community. All these books and movies are available for checkout at Massanutten Regional Library. Please take the time to enjoy.